Welcome to the Tech Jam, and I want to thank 7 Days for hosting us. I think this is our second year presenting at the Tech Jam, so again, thanks to 7 Days. My name is T.J. Donovan, I'm the Attorney General, and I'll be the narrator for an anatomy of a data breach. First, let me go down and introduce everybody. Jerry Tarrant, who is going to be playing the COO and the CEO, but in his real life, he's the COO and co-founder of MyWebGrocer. Jerry, thanks for being here. Heather Roszkowski, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at UVM Health Network. She'll be playing the IT manager. Heather, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Matt Borick, a good friend of mine, who is an attorney at Downs Rachlin and Martin, is going to be playing an attorney here today. You're stepping out of your shoes, Matt. John Rajewski, who is the Associate Professor at Champlain College and Director of the Leahy Center for Digital Investigation, will be playing the Forensic Investigator. And then Nick Sherman, who is works at Leonine Public Affairs, will be the Public Relations Crisis Specialist. And Mindy Higgins Bero, who is the insurance representative at Hickok and Boardman, will be doing the insurance. And then Jennifer Vander Veer from the FBI will be that FBI investigator. And finally, the regulator, the enforcer, is Ryan Krieger at the Attorney General's office, where he is the enforcer during his day job. So we know this about data breaches. They're on the rise. And they're affecting businesses and consumers everywhere, including the state of Vermont. And as we continue to enter into a digital economy, and Vermont plays a role in that global economy, these are going to happen more often. And so the question is this: how do we protect businesses? How do we protect consumers? How do we let Vermonters be part of that digital economy while protecting consumers' privacy and their data? And so we thought the best way to do that is to play one out in real life. So we're going to get started. Okay. The year's 2015. Vermont's business community has been hardening their defenses against cyber attacks, warned by such recent high-profile breaches at Target, Home Depot, and Sony. EOL Solutions operates a chain of 5 assisted living facilities and is based in St. Albans, Vermont. Its facilities are located in Burlington, Bennington, Brattleboro, Barry, Vermont, and Bow, New Hampshire. Bow, New Hampshire. I don't know what happens in New Hampshire. I don't know Vermont towns. Bow. I just don't know how to pronounce Vermont towns. It has 45 full-time employees and annual revenues of $50 million. EOL Solutions, their CEO has a teenage son. That teenage son, Jerry, is checking his email on his dad's computer when this email comes in.
Which would never happen, by the way.
And the email is up. Okay. The son clicks on the link. Pop-ups start appearing all over the computer. He cancels all the boxes and finishes up. The computer does not have any antivirus software.
Yeah,
Never happened. Jerry, you're 0 for 2. A keylogger is installed on the CEO's home computer, which lets hackers access the CEO's personal and work email. A week later, this email arrives in the inbox of EOL's Human Resources Manager. The employee quickly sets about putting together the W-2 forms to send back to the CEO. But just before clicking send, she thinks to pick up the phone, always a smart decision, and call the CEO to ask him why exactly he needs the W-2. Jerry Tarrant, you're the CEO. You pick up that phone call. What do you say?
Stop the presses. So this actually is a scenario very similar, except it was a monetary issue from our CFO in our Dublin, Ireland office, and they got an email like this from me, and it was all set to set up a wire. And fortunately, we had a policy in place that said no wires go out without verbal authentication, and we caught it. We got lucky. We shouldn't have caught it. It was over $100,000 wire. so these sort of frauds happen all the time. So this is not just hypothetical. This stuff happens all the time. So getting back to the script, what would happen right away is obviously stop the presses. I would have my IT manager, probably my general counsel, get up, so our in-house lawyer or our outside counsel. And we would do a couple things right off the top. We would try and have our IT manager start figuring out, digging into where this thing came from, the origins of it, almost always exclusively out of the country. Figure out how they infiltrated the system so that we can understand it. Go back through our policies and procedures for data breaches, make sure that everyone's adhering to it, keeping abreast of it. And then we would send out probably a company-wide reminder, which we've done often. But at that point, you know, we would say, hey, it looks like we got this thing, but let's get some more data before we start, as they said, high-five. And we're not high-fiving because we've already been infiltrated. We have to understand where it came from. And that's where IT jumps in and starts doing all the diligence to find out what we missed and how it happened.
Right. Heather, are you high-fiving yet? What are
Not
you
yet.
doing? What's the IT response?
Yeah, we see these things quite often, and one of the first things we do is we try and figure out where they came from, and see if we can either block that address so that we're not going to get any more of those types of emails from that address. In some cases, we find that they have actually stood up an email address with the individual, the spear phishing name, so they may actually take a Gmail address out in Jerry's name so that it looks like it's coming from him. So we'll try and find out where it came from. We often look to see if anyone else in the organization got one, and if possible, we try and remove it from the inboxes before that person has a chance to respond or take action on that email. But we definitely want to make sure that we're protecting all of the individuals within our organization so nobody takes action on those emails.
Let me ask the audience. We have a good response. Now, keep in mind, this is 2015. We're not as smart as we are today about what's going on in the world. This is 2015. We have a good response. Everybody likes this response. Or is there any other suggestion? Sir, just state your name and tell me who you are.
Richard.
All right.
So the only thing that strikes me, because I think probably 2/3, 3/4, maybe everybody already got this, is we get emails from the outside. Anybody can change the from name. So did you not first take the step to determine whether it was an inside email, which is much more serious, versus somebody who just absconded your name? I mean, that happens all the time. That doesn't mean it happens.
Well, what happened in this particular case, and this is what was remarkable about it, is that my email was jtarrant@mywebgrocer.com. They changed the O in grocer to a 0 in grocer. So you reply to that, you're not realizing, and it's actually going to a different email, but it looked like it came from me. Everything, so they had found the way I sign off on things, and they just put it out there. And our CFO was like, yeah, Jerry's asking for it, let's get it done. And what we discovered was on the hit reply email, it was that different, a 0 instead of an O. That's hard to see when you're not paying attention when you get so many emails.
Insurance, it's 2015. Does EOL Solutions have cybersecurity insurance? Does it even exist in 2015? How much does it cost?
Yeah, so it did exist in 2015. Just a lot of people weren't as privy to its importance. So I think one important point is the fact that that person made the phone call, and a lot of the policies now actually will require that a phone call is made to give you coverage. So it's really back to basics on that one key step. But for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to assume that Jerry's general policy, a general carrier, maybe threw in a little bit of cyber liability coverage, a little bit of data breach coverage, probably a limit of $50,000. So you have your carrier and potentially an agent saying, yeah, you've got coverage. But in this situation, we say, all right, that's not really a policy. If you want real coverage, you need to get full cyber, a true cyber policy. So usually those limits start at $1 million and higher, depending on what your needs are. And essentially, the policies are all different. Most insurance has very standard forms. The world of cyber they're all different. So you really need to be pretty well versed in what the policy is giving you. And then you have your carrier and potentially an agent saying, yeah, you've got coverage. But in this situation, we say, all right, that's not really a policy. If you want real coverage, you need to get full cyber, a true cyber policy. So usually those limits start at $1 million and higher, depending on what your needs are. And essentially, the policies are all different. Most insurance has very standard forms. The world of cyber is there's all different. So you really need to be pretty well versed in what the policy is giving you. Basically, though, they're unique in the fact that they're combined in that you have several first-party and third-party coverages. So the third party is kind of where this initial scare of cyber came on, in that it's your liability to a third party. So if you're hacked and somebody's data is compromised, it's all of the kind of obligations you have, the regulations that are in place, and then essentially the costs associated with that in terms of notifying people that their information has been compromised, and the steps that you then need to take to make that situation right. You also can find situations where you then, might have a class action lawsuit, or, somebody has sustained bodily injury, if you will, mental anguish, because certain information was released about them online. So then you might be looking at a lawsuit in that regard. So the policy, again, the liability piece of that is going to respond to those types of circumstances. Also within a cyber policy, you have what we refer to as the first-party coverages, which are the expenses that you as the business incur. So if your site is shut down for 2 weeks because it's been hacked and it's not functioning, particularly for like online retailers, if suddenly you can't operate for 2 weeks, what does that do to your business income? So the first party covers things like business income and the cost to rebuild those systems. So the policies are kind of multifaceted. So again, knowing that we're back in 2015, Jerry and I have this conversation to say, okay, let's take a look at a real policy with multifaceted coverage, much higher limits, and in the big scheme of things, no, I wouldn't say it's expensive. It's usually based on the entity's sales, and that's kind of the benchmark. Essentially, what kind of info are you dealing with? Do you have HIPAA information? How fragile is the info that you're keeping, and how much of it do you have? And that, in part, is what dictates the cost of the policy. When you implement one, you fill out an application, which basically is a really useful self-audit to how good you're doing with your security. And then based on those answers, the underwriters determine how they're going to price your policy. And then you put it in place. And in this case, because they did their due diligence and didn't think that they had an issue, there was no problem putting a policy in place that then would respond to something, not to give it away, that we might find out later down the road. So
Let me just clarify one point, that in the last 3 years, the recommended policy limits went from $50,000 to $1 million.
well, I think the difference is for a true policy, kind of the standard limits are $1 million, but what we're seeing is standard carriers just kind of adding like a throw-in on your policy. And I just think it's a false sense of security, because if you had a real issue, $50,000 in coverage wouldn't touch it.
Okay.
But it's just sort of their way of saying, yeah, you've got something, which
Yeah.
in some cases, people, if they don't want to invest in it, we say, okay, well, something's better than nothing. But
Okay. All right, question.
Yeah, I just have one quick question, and because I was reading something that Warren Buffett wrote. My name's Mike, and he thinks it's going to be like liability mandatory for car insurance if you get a car loan. Like if an investor's going to invest a lot of money in
I'll
your
go to you on
leasing
that.
company or something like that,
What do you answer?
that they're going to require that you have some kind of cyber insurance, almost the amount that you need to have. And the question I can talk to you about later, if you do all the things you're supposed to do, you can document it, and a third party comes in and tests and tries to penetrate, that helps you get lower premiums, hopefully?
yes,
That's what I'm saying? Okay.
yes, if you have good security, it's going to help you. Yes.
But Matt Borick, lawyer, state of Vermont can require businesses to carry this insurance. Should they?
I mean, I think it's a great idea, because I look at data breach as like fire. You insure your business against casualty losses, property thefts, all kinds of things like that. Excuse me. And so this is the reality that we live in. It's just like having a fire. You don't want to have the business burn down and have no coverage. Well, you don't want the data, to be taken or whatever and have no coverage. So I think it's becoming, the norm, not the exception. And I think now, I'm not a contract lawyer, I'm more of a litigator, but in the contract law field, we have a lot of provisions being written into contracts that are specifically geared to what cybersecurity protections the contracting parties have. It used to be the case where you would have indemnification provisions where you'd say, if there's a breach, you'll cover me, you'll pay for my losses. But that doesn't cut it anymore because you're only as strong as your bottom line is, and if you're contracting with someone who doesn't have a strong bottom line, then the indemnity is worth nothing. So you want a stronger provision in place, and especially with GDPR now, it's becoming even more the norm. So I think it's definitely an area where the law and policy is taking us.
Jerry, from the business perspective,
Yeah.
should the state mandate or should the market direct?
You know the answer.
That's why I'm asking. I'm looking for the other side.
With all due respect to Matt, who's one of our lawyers that we use a lot, no. So here's what we do know is that our customers oftentimes require certain amounts of coverage, which is great for the insurance company. They say, we don't do work with anybody that doesn't have $5 million or under in data breach type coverage. But the big issue is, from a company perspective, is financial is obviously the end game, but the issue is the impact to your business if you have a big breach like this. The insurance company is not going to win you your credibility back to keep your customers happy. So you almost can't buy an insurance policy big enough to overcome a real bad data breach. And we've all seen this in the press. One bad data breach could bring a very, very valuable company down to nothing overnight. We've actually not gained customers because they've had a couple breaches from third parties, and they said, you know what, MyWebGrocer, we're done dealing with outside companies. We have to control everything. We're going to build it all in-house and stuff like that because they've been so afraid of what it's done to their business. So insurances are great to cover kind of those near-term costs and some financial type stuff, but it's the impact to your company and the prestige of your company that's the real big issue with a bad breach.
Great. All right. Let's fast forward to today. It's Friday afternoon. It's 4 p.m. Everybody's getting ready for the open bar at the Tech Jam reception. People are starting to shut down their computers and leave for the weekend when suddenly this comes out. Can everybody see that over there, by the way? Can you want to read that?
It's kind of a standard ransomware screen. It's informing the business. So this is showing up on people's screens that their files have been encrypted. It helpfully provides the Wikipedia link to what that means. It explains how decryption works and how they're not going to be able to do it. And then it explains how the business can go about getting out of the ransomware by helpfully explaining how Bitcoin works and what Bitcoin address they should be sending it to and how much Bitcoin they're going to have to spend in order to unlock that ransomware.
Okay, Heather, IT manager, what do you do?
So we find something like this, immediately we're trying to figure out how widespread it is. And so for the purposes of this, we're going to say it impacted about 20 computers and 2 servers. And that those servers do contain sensitive information, both HR data, so we have employee information that's on one of those servers, including social security numbers, and we also have one with our patient data. So I'm immediately going to go to the CEO and inform him that we have a big issue, and that it appears to be spreading, and so we immediately need to contain and identify what the threat is, and then remediate.
Jerry, who do you call?
Yeah, well, first of all, Beer Friday's off then. So obviously there's a lot. I mean, as we were talking offline here, this is not just an IT thing, like an outage, hey, you guys deal with it and let me know how it goes. This is like circle the wagons type of stuff. So you're bringing in IT, you're bringing in general counsel, probably outside counsel, maybe certain consultants that are expertise, and we'll talk about that in this sort of thing. And the first thing you're trying to do, well, I shouldn't say first thing, you're doing these things simultaneously. You're trying to identify the threat. You're trying to understand what was breached so that you know what sort of policies, procedures you need to enact to reach out to customers, reach out to clients, reach out to employees. You bring in HR. They have a role in this as well. And then you just need to understand what is our legal obligation here, right? You don't want to make a bad situation worse by, and we've seen this a lot, companies, again, trying to be so protective of their business, missing out on their legal requirements to reach out and say, hey, FBI or state regulators, this is what's happened, we're on top of it, you're welcome to come in. So there's a whole lot that goes on. There's a lot of sleepless nights that goes into something like this, which I'm glad I never had to experience.
Okay. Matt Borick, you're the lawyer. You get called 4 o'clock. What is your first move?
Well, before I get to that, I just want to make an observation about what Jerry's saying, and he's making a very important point here about knowing who to call in the moment. Because one of the biggest things that I always counsel, in fact, the biggest thing I always counsel clients on or people I'm speaking to about this topic is the importance of preparation for a breach. And one of those things is team. Who are you going to call at 4 o'clock when this is going down? I mean, here's a situation where we know there's a problem. There is ransomware on the system. We know it's not just a glitch where it may be a freaking email like we saw, like with a fake email address, or maybe a phishing email. This, we know something went wrong, and so we've gone beyond the point of having an incident, as we refer to it sometimes, to what really looks like a breach. And the question becomes then, as Heather said, what data are we talking about here? But the first step, again, is to be prepared. And I'll add this, that we have different kinds of data that we're involved with. As Heather said, we've got employee information, we've got health information for the patients and the patients who live at the facility. So that, of course, raises the HIPAA spectacle, but it also raises the state laws across every state in the country. It's important for me then as a lawyer to come in and say, all right, what exactly happened here that we know about? So take a stock of what I know, but ask the more important question of what potential affected population are we talking about here? I mean, we have patients, employees. We have potentially, caregivers or family members of patients who are doing financial responsibility for them, so their information may be involved. We may have former patients' information still, former employees, former caregivers and family members who could be all over the place. Right? We know the residents of these facilities live in Vermont and New Hampshire, but our employees work in Vermont or New Hampshire, but they may live in Massachusetts, or other places. And then if the family members may live all over the country. This is a big issue because if we have a data breach that affects people who live in all 50 states, there are 50 sets of legal requirements to comply with there.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, a lot of state laws are congruent, and there's going to be crossover. But you got to figure out, as a lawyer here, what's sort of the most restrictive place to go, and that sets the ceiling that I know I'm going to be covered for everybody underneath me, because all states have their own peculiarities. Vermont has got a very robust statute but one of the things that's unique about Vermont is there's a preliminary notice feature in our statute. And so one of the first things I do is I'm going to let Ryan know about this situation, because even if I don't have all the information yet and we're getting to that, I'm at least letting him know that something's up and we're proactively jumping into it, because it's not like I'm taking my client to the wolves and saying, here, we're in trouble. It's actually reaching out for help. And for the same reason, that's why I would contact someone like Jennifer at FBI, not because I want to give my client to the law. I want to say, look, we need your expertise and your help here, because they've seen this. That the old Progressive, was at the Progressive, now Farmers Insurance, we've known a thing or two, we've seen a thing or two. Well, that's the role that they're playing here. So they're actually members of the team just as much as I am. And then the call I also have us make is to the insurance carrier, right? Always put the insurance carrier on notice, even if you don't know if you have cyber coverage. Always, always, always put your carrier on notice, because you never know. You may get you may get the response that you don't have coverage, but you'll never know unless you put them on notice.
So you've called the regulator, you've called the insurance, and you've called the feds. What's the FBI going to do?
The first thing I'm going to do is thank them for calling, especially thank them for calling as soon as possible. I think people get a little confused exactly what the role of the FBI is in these situations. The FBI investigates. That's our role. We don't regulate. We don't victimize the victim. We see the company and all of the people whose data are in the company as victims. And we're certainly we have zero interest in making anything any harder. So our job as the FBI is to both find out who did this and provide as much help as we can within the limits of what we're allowed to do to the company to try to recover what they can and give them guidance in handling this incident. So I'll thank them for calling as soon as possible, because in the world of cyber, data is perishable. The clues that help us track down information in the cyber world are disappearing however fast some server out there deletes its logs. And that could be, we could be talking about hours, we could be talking days, we could be talking months, but that information is going to be scattered around the world. So the sooner that I get called, the sooner I can start gathering those logs and those bits of information and preserving it so that there is an investigation to be had. So the sooner the better. And additionally, we do have a lot of information out there through all the investigations that we're doing on this type of ransomware. This is going to probably look like Lockheed ransomware. We have cases on Lockheed ransomware across the country, and I'll be able to call back to the people who are actually investigating this actively and say, this is looking like Lockheed ransomware. What guidance can I give the company? How does it usually get into a computer system? What should they be looking for? And I can immediately give that feedback to the company to help them deal with this.
Let me ask this question. Do you recommend to pay the ransom?
Never.
Insurance, you've been notified. Are you recommending to pay the ransom? If not, why? If so, why?
That depends.
I want to give my answer before insurance gets
Right,
involved.
go
here.
ahead.
It is the FBI's policy never to recommend that a company pay a ransom. We only give advice. We can't tell you what to do, and we certainly understand, and I've certainly talked to plenty of companies that do end up paying a ransom. But you have to keep in mind that these are criminal enterprises. And the way that they keep going, and the reason why they keep making ransomware and why ransomware is continuing to spread, is because people are giving them money. So there is an economy surrounding ransomware. And the more people that pay these ransoms, the more this economy is funded and fueled. So we're always going to recommend not to pay the ransom. Additionally, when these things first started popping out, they were being made by the people that were distributing them. So there was a sense of business quality behind ransomware. I wrote this piece of ransomware, and I made sure it was installed in these computers, and I want to make sure that people keep paying me, so I'm going to make sure that when they do pay me, I'm going to give them a good key back. But now, this is just, you can just buy this off the shelf. So people that buy ransomware really aren't invested in the quality of the ransomware or whether or not it has a very good reputation. They're just trying to get as many distributions out there. So if you pay, there's diminishing chance now that you're actually going to get a good key. And so a lot of money is just getting thrown at this, and the chance of you getting an actual decryption key is reducing. So it used to be, yeah, you pay, you're probably going to get a key. Now, I don't even know if it's 50-50. We see a lot, and then we also see a lot of double dipping. You'll get a few things unlocked, or they'll just ask you for more money, and you'll be extorted all the way through. So it's a risky business out there, and we're always going to say, if you can afford to not pay, don't do it. It's not going to work out well.
Insurance, different opinion?
Well, not entirely, but in a perfect world, nobody would pay, but that's not necessarily reality.
We are in a very imperfect world.
Exactly. So essentially, when we get the call to put us on notice, again, to your point about timeliness, it's critical you let the insurance company know. Even if you're not sure, just letting them know, because they're going to want to deploy their resources immediately, because as Jennifer was saying, this data disappears quickly, and they're going to need all of that to subsequently make a decision, do we pay? And I think, the insurance company will deploy and pay for all of the resources that you need, forensics, law, PR. It's good to kind of know ahead of time too, can you pick your own people, or is it the insurance company that's going to bring in their own team? Again, you want to bring them in because you might have some trusted advisors, but then all of a sudden the insurance company isn't necessarily going to pay for those people. They haven't been vetted out or approved by the insurance company. So that piece is critical before you get too far down the path. It's important to kind of understand and have a plan in place ahead of time, like how will this process work in the event something goes wrong? So when you get to that place, it actually is ultimately the carrier's decision as to whether or not they're going to pay that ransom.
Jerry, do you agree with that?
Yes, I definitely think it's our final decision. The way we look at it is, from ransom, when we think about ransom in the old days, it was because it was a person or whatever. If they kidnap your goldfish, probably not. They kidnap your kid, hey, I don't care what you say. I want this person. So it's a cost value analysis. It's a pretty simple calculation. Is it worth the risk of giving money to get back something that keeps your company afloat, right? Is it worth the money of giving that to this guy because my kid's safety is at risk? Those are the analysis that you have to do.
Yeah, exactly. And they collaborate. I mean, they're going to talk. It's going to be between the client, the carrier, potentially the FBI too. Although we do, in my experience, find that the FBI isn't brought in as much, which I know Jennifer is saying she wants to be brought in more. I think a lot of companies are afraid what that means if suddenly the, scary FBI is involved. So in, the situations whether or not they're there to give their opinion, I think they're able to share information, probably a lot of the information that the FBI uses through their forensic teams. The insurance carriers also have those resources to know, okay, where is this coming from? Is this a good criminal that will send us the key, or is it a bad one that won't, and so we're going to pay them for no reason? Who is it going to? Is it going to some terrorist organization in Syria, or is it some guy in a 10-story building in Eastern Europe who literally, clocks in from 8 to 5 and just sends this information out? Like, these businesses exist around the world, and so these breach response teams, like, they'll literally call these 800 numbers where somebody's like, hello, how can we help you? Assist you in buying your Bitcoin and paying your ransom. And they'll help negotiate those fees down sometimes. But inevitably, the big picture is looked at, and we've seen situations where ransom deadlines haven't been met, and what maybe would have been a $20,000 payment that could have unlocked a system then turned into a $150,000 system rebuild. So the way insurance works is they want to minimize their losses. So if they can pay it and prevent themselves from suffering a bigger loss, if it makes sense, they will do it. But it does bode the ethical question, is that the right thing to do? But there's currently no regulation saying that you cannot do that. So, as with cyber coverage in general, it changes every year, so we'll see where things go.
Let's poll the audience. Who pulls the ransom? Or who pays the ransom? Sir.
I just wanted to mention one thing, and maybe it was buried in the IT response, nobody said anything about backups. Right, so if I was on the IT team, I'd say, oh, I have backups, or I should. I'll assume that any decent company, has them. And that's a big assumption, but if they don't, then they should. Even as an individual, I have multiples. How recent are they? Can we, hopefully they're not on the same system that was in there. And the data, while it was encrypted, may not have leaked, so there was a lot of comments about, notifying all these people, and it may be none of the data left the company, it's just not usable, right? So you would say, well, maybe it's I'm behind a day, or I'm behind an hour, or I'm behind whatever, and all those transactions might have to get re-entered or something like that. So there's some recovery, but if you have backups, they're not all together on the same system that you have, you should be able to restore it. So that wasn't mentioned. So a lot of this, while the reporting and all that stuff should be done because a criminal activity has occurred, it may not have the impact, that you'd ever think of paying a ransom, because it's like, okay, we lost whatever, we have to rerun those transactions, we take the system down for maintenance, we tell people we're sorry, we restore it, and we're good. Right?
Thank you.
So there's that.
Sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that paying the ransom or restoring from backups doesn't fix the underlying vulnerability, how you got infected in the first place. So even once you get your data back, it's not really the end of the story, because you can get hit with the same ransomware a week later.
Anybody paying the ransom?
Good job, audience.
All right, IT, necessity of backups we kind of covered. Tell me, this has destabilized your business. What do you guys, what is the next move from IT and the CEO? What are you guys talking about?
Well, we're talking about the stuff that Scott talked
Right.
about. I mean, he knows the stuff, he's been in MyWebGrocer, he knows that this is exactly what we do. It's like, what is our exposure here? We know we're doing our backups every 15 minutes or whatever, company-wide. We're feeling pretty good about it. And obviously, all our data is encrypted. But we're doing a scenario by which maybe we weren't as sophisticated a group, and some of this stuff we call PII, the person identifiable information that gets out there, then your obligations change, because you have an obligation to get word out to these folks. So again, we come back to what we said originally. It's what's been exposed. We need to know that so that we know the next steps to take, and that's where it really falls on IT to really dig in and identify what's been exposed, while, as you addressed it, addressing the leaky bucket, what I call a leaky bucket. It's one thing to keep putting water in the bucket, but it's got holes in it. You're wasting your time. Let's plug the holes before we keep putting water in it. So that's the other obligation, is to identify where it came from so we can secure that leak.
Who are you bringing in?
IT.
Who are you bringing in? We bringing in John Rajewski, forensics?
Yeah, so a lot of times when these things happen, one of the first things we want to do is stop the infection from spreading. We want to identify that we have good backups. We also want to make sure that if this infection has been festering in our environment, we may have already copied the encrypted files as our backups. So we may go to our backups and find that the user of the system didn't tell us right away that they had ransomware, and that the backups are also impacted by ransomware. So we need to make sure and see how far back we have to go if we have good data. Then, whether or not we are going through the insurance carrier's forensic expert, or we're going through our own forensic expert, we typically want to bring someone in so that we can identify not only the vulnerability of how they got in, but we want to make sure that we have fully are able to remove any ransomware or any underlying malware that may be present in our organization.
John Rajewski, you're called, you leave Champlain College, you go to ELL Solutions. What do you do?
I jump in my black helicopter. I travel at light speed. I rappel down with the rope. No, but honestly, it's a team effort because I need to work with legal. This is now a potential legal breach situation. Ransomware is not just used to encrypt files. It's also used to throw smoke on what the attackers were doing for the last 3 years in your network. So my job is to work with legal, try to remain not emotional. I'm trying to answer specific questions, confirm or refute what we think is going on. Try to answer the who, what, where, why, and how it happened. There's 20 machines that were hit with ransomware. Okay, can I prioritize them? 2 servers, PII, HIPAA data. Let's look at those. Let's try to go through log files. Because when ransomware infects the machine, like in that screen over there, it's not going to infect the entire operating system necessarily. So I can still look at underlying functions to try to figure out what the attacker was doing. They had the CEO's credentials for 3 years. What could they have done? Can I look through other systems like firewall logs? Does the organization have other data sources that weren't encrypted to try to figure out the timeline of how bad is this? In this situation, I'm really trying to identify the ransomware variant. Is this variant specific to exfiltrating information? Because if it is, we have a breach. Because what some ransomware will do is it'll infect a system, it'll steal the information, and then provide the ransom to you. So at that point, you have a potential breach situation, which is a lot scarier than just encrypting files. Encrypting files is a different situation. So yeah, I'm going to work with legal, try to work as fast as we can, because we do have some reporting requirements to Ryan. In this situation, if I go back into a role here, forensics was unable to determine definitively if data left the network. It does not appear that this ransomware variant exfiltrated information, but it does look like the malware was on the system for about 3 years. We do see some suspicious logins with the CEO's account that could raise some questions, but we need a lot more time with this evidence to really flush out what happened.
Okay. So things are not going well. Malware was found on the system. It's been there for 3 years. Jerry, it probably came in through the CEO's home computer. Though it probably...
Because you know what your teenagers are doing all the time.
Yeah, right.
I just know they don't have access to my computer.
Though it is of a type that steals data. Unfortunately, there are very few log files, so it's hard to determine what's been stolen. Matt Borick has called Ryan Krieger about the breach. Ryan Krieger has notified his boss, who's running for re-election, who's very concerned about privacy, who's very concerned about the most vulnerable in our community, and holds a press conference talking about the need to protect the most vulnerable who are in our assisted care facilities and making sure that their data and their privacy is protected. Jerry, you now have a PR crisis. What do you do?
Exactly.
Actually, wait. I need to jump in there.
Couldn't keep me down that long.
If we got a preliminary call from the lawyer saying we think we've had, which Matt has done, he's complied, he's given us that preliminary notice, that maybe we have a breach, we're not sure what has happened yet, that's confidential. We are not running out and giving a press conference before the business even knows what is going on. I want to be very, very clear on that.
Like I said, it's 2 weeks till an election day.
I want to be very clear on
Jerry, you got a PR crisis. What's your move?
So I think it's a really interesting point, though, and one of the things I think is really important, and I think particularly for Jennifer and the state, is recognizing, as me too, as really one of the best parts about this thing is we've had some calls is to understand where they come from. Fortunately, I haven't been in a position where we had to report anything of that magnitude. But as a company, like it or not, your first thing is, I'm protecting my company here. What do I got to do? And you're reluctant sometimes to call on the state. The last thing you want is the state breathing down your neck. You want to feel like they're a partner in this thing, TJ. So regardless of election, re-election, so I appreciate.
I'm just changing the facts of the hypothetical. It's a hypothetical.
So, but I appreciate Ryan and Jennifer's words, because I think that's important to get that word out there, because they can be very helpful, and we're all in this together. The company certainly didn't want to breach any of this stuff. That's obvious. The state doesn't want it out there. So we're all in this together, so I think it's a really important thing. So getting back to it, yeah, you got a big PR problem, as I said at the beginning. You lose the confidence of your customers and all, that can put you out of business overnight. So again, I think the big thing is you bring in PR, but I think, let's let PR answer, but we got to have answers for PR so they know how to do this and make sure that everyone knows that we're taking the proper steps to protect their privacy data.
Nick Sherman, you get called. What is your first question?
So my first question is, Jerry, why didn't you call me sooner? And actually, it's appropriate. We are usually the last people to the party, and that's okay because everybody else at this table should be notified first. But what everybody should think about from the get-go when you're first aware of a problem is have this in your mind. What is it going to mean for my company from a public relations perspective, from a consumer relations perspective? So when we come in, the first thing that we want to do is we want to say, well, what are the goals here? What are your public relations goals in the crisis that you find yourself in? And I think in this example, that probably is, well, the first question really is this going to be made public? Are the consumers going to be informed?
Let me ask this question. Across the board, do you start with the assumption that everything's going to be public? That everything will eventually become public? Is that part of the analysis?
I think it's certainly part of the analysis, and you need to ask yourself, if we don't make this public, if we're not legally obligated to, and we think we shouldn't have to, so we're not gonna, what is the risk if it leaks?
So that's a great point. Matt Borick, give us, is this reportable? You've made the initial call. As Nick just said, is this gonna leak? Do we have to make this report? Jerry, your team, tell me this discussion that's going on, because if it becomes public, this is bad for business. You got obligations to report. Nick, you know what your job is. Do the conversation.
This is probably the most difficult part of the process, to be frank. Particularly when you got an AG who's bucking for re-election. But anyway, it is because the issue of notice, in data breach is a legal issue. And it is a PR issue. It is clearly both. And the last thing you want to do is report if you don't have to. I mean, think about that. I mean, if you don't have to notify, you don't want to notify. I mean, why put yourself through that potential public relations nightmare? But the problem is that if you don't notify, and you should have notified, then Ryan is not going to be happy, nor are every other Attorney General offices in the country that have people affected by this. I mean, so you're really running it's like along the edge of a razor here sometimes in what you're deciding. So that's where where John is critical, and John, as John says, he comes in and he tries to figure out exactly what happened here. I mean, there's only so much that Heather is going to do internally to know. John's going to be doing a deeper dive to figure out exactly what happened, because what defines what is a breach is a very specific thing. I mean, there's got to be, first of all, the data have got to be unprotected in some way. I know someone mentioned encryption of data. If the data if there's exfiltrated data, but it's all encrypted or otherwise protected, that's not a breach under most statutes, and probably all of them. It's not, it's not a compromised data. It's just it's a lockdown piece of information that's useless. But so if you find out that you're dealing with unprotected data, you're in trouble, right? The breach now kicks in. But then the other piece of it is what does the hacker have had to have done, with this data? Do they have to acquire the data for it to be a breach, or is it merely they can access the data that it was a breach? Some states, or most states, I'll say, define it as an acquisition of data. They have to actually have the data and acquired it. Other states, though, a couple of them have, it's a use, or it's an access, excuse me. Like I think in Florida is one of the states where if you have proof that there was access of your data, whether or not it's exfiltrated, that may create a notice obligation for you to consumers who are located in Florida. And that's what makes it so hard, from a law perspective, with, again, being a patchwork of regulation that we have all over. So we're going to have to find out, all kinds of answers from John, and look at, what the evidence is telling us. What does forensics say? Do we have, was there a stolen computer, for example, in a case? This case, we didn't have that, but, we may in other cases. Are you getting reports of identity theft from people? Are your employees saying, a reporter, oh my God, my identity's been stolen? You're hearing instances of this, that are becoming rampant. Have the data been made public, God forbid? All kinds of little notices like that tip you off that you've got a problem. So you got to make these decisions very quickly. My advice always is, again, when it comes to, if you think you have a breach or may have a breach, I'm definitely notifying Ryan no matter what. Because again, I see Ryan again as our ally here. I know, Jerry's point is very valid. And I said before, you don't want to be seen as bringing yourself to the wolves here, but you want to be dealing with Ryan now and not a year from now. Because if you're dealing with Ryan a year from now, it means that you've really let this thing slide. And that's the key thing. So making that decision is one of the hardest things, though. I can't emphasize that enough.
Nick, what is your advice to the company?
So depending on the crisis communication situation, that may vary. In this specific example, basically, I think what you're facing is that if you are not legally obligated to report and you don't report, but that leaks, you are going to look like the bad guy. You're going to look like you're trying to cover something up. And that is bad. That's very bad for you. So in this instance, I think you got to think about who your PR targets are. They are your consumers, they are the public in general, and they are your regulators. And you want all three of those groups to be sympathetic to you. So in this case, I think the suggestion is, yes, you do report it, and then we have to talk through what the message development is and how you're going to report that. And then, the points there are, you got to understand who's currently aware. Who knows now? I mean, if you're going to report, you want to do it on your own terms. The risk is still a leak, even if you're planning to report. So who knows? It's everybody at this table, and I think it's your entire company at this point, Jerry. So that's a lot of people. So time is of the essence now. You want to develop a message, which I think in this case is, we've done everything in good faith. We've done it as quickly as we possibly could, and we are making our best efforts to get you the information about what's going on as it becomes available to us. And then you want to make sure that your entire organization understands that messaging, so everybody's speaking with the same idea. But you don't want everybody to speak. You want to appoint a single point of contact. And for everyone else, if they get inquiries from the press or anyone else, you want to say, I can't answer that. Please contact so-and-so, who is the spokesperson for this situation. And then, I guess the last thing I'll say is that what we would generally do now is stay with you as you go through this process, because things are going to evolve and change, and it is a crisis. You're going to have to deal with stuff on the fly. So the PR crisis communication expert helps coach you on situations as they arise.
Mark Heyman.
So this was out there anyway. A few things. First I'll say is I would encourage everybody to not look at these steps or functional roles as a flow chart. It's almost everything at the same time, all the time. We had an instance a few years ago where we received a security patch notice late, I believe Thursday evening. Decided on Friday morning we prioritize it and we would tackle it Monday morning. First off, security patch update notices are also vulnerability notices to bad guys. We actually got lucky and caught somebody in live time, only had access for roughly 20 some odd minutes, and we literally got lucky and saw it happening in real time, cut it off. I would say technically our legal analysis did not meet the definition of breach. Won't go into all the reasons why. In terms of reporting, on that day, we solved it, we closed the whole We also looked at our privacy policy and said, what have we promised to folks? Whether we could have used better adjectives, verbs, or anything else. We had a word in there saying compromised. We made a very quick decision, literally half an hour of legal research on the fly. Vermont, strictest thing, could be 50 states. What does Vermont say? What does California say? We chose the Vermont-California notice. That gave us the template with the plan to notify every single customer worldwide. So we already knew 60,000, we're B2B. So 60,000, not people, companies are going to be notified. We rolled out the EU notice first. This is literally within 48 hours of everything. I will say it was the worst bunker experience for 10 days that we had with PR, legal, and IT literally reviewing every single email question, every single everything. We got a call from the UK Register within 6 hours of the first EU emails going out, and the headline of the article within 48 hours of the breach itself was "Good Guy Logic Supply." So
That's good PR.
the PR takeaway was, of course, these things happen. But the story was, no, hey, we just found out about this, and then they talked about Yahoo had just announced what they didn't announce 3 years ago. Yep. So the story was, these things happen, how you deal with them is what defines you as a business, good guy or bad guy, and from everything else. That's not possible in all situations, but
Being proactive as opposed to being reactive.
Proactive and be open to the fact that that what might kill you from a PR angle might actually be open to the notion that it might in fact work the opposite way. Because that was not an easy decision for us to make to go full force out there. And we were satisfied. We were like, oh wow, we got good press and gained customers.
Yeah, well, let me go to Jennifer at the FBI.
I just wanted to make two quick distinctions here. First, when we're discussing reporting data breaches, that's reporting to regulators. Reporting to the FBI is an entirely different thing, and Ryan likes to be notified early because that helps him get his process going. But for us, we like to be notified early because we can't do our job well unless we're notified very early on. The conversation with your forensics team and having them do the investigation, if the FBI isn't involved early on, able to actually work with the forensic team or having a conversation with the forensic team or help the forensics team, if that's not happening simultaneously, you're not really going to get the best investigation you can out of the FBI, and we're not going to be able to help you the way we really should. So I want to just make that distinction. We're not the regulators. Reporting to the FBI is different than the reporting for this larger discussion. And additionally, although we get along great with Ryan and we work with them a lot, we don't report to them. If you report to the FBI, we will say, hey, you may have state obligations here. You're going to have to discuss that with your legal team, but we don't send information over to them. It's an entirely separate process. And the other distinction I just wanted to make, sort of made before, was really we need to be in there with the forensics team. I need to be next to John when he's coming in and saying, hey, this is what I need for my investigation. I'm not going to get in your way, but this is what I'm looking for. Keep me posted. The more integrated I am with that forensics team, the better it's going to be for everybody.
John, are you going to welcome the FBI's participation?
Absolutely. I've worked with Jen on several things in the past. She's very professional, and what she's saying is true. They're true partners, and I think we have something unique in Vermont. It's a really good ecosystem, and Vermont business should take advantage of it.
Matt Borick, you've called Ryan Krieger. Ryan, what's your move?
Well, one thing I just want to add to what Jen said is there is an exemption to almost every data breach statute, sometimes I think it's probably pretty rare, if criminal investigators tell you not to notify about the breach. Sometimes, because you notify, you're telling the bad guys that whatever they did worked. So sometimes they'll say, look, delay until we do our investigation or move it a little farther. If that happens, get it in writing, so that when you report to us, you can say the reason for the delay was because we were told by law enforcement not to provide notice up until that point. So that's an important point to add. I checked out my email while I was sitting up here. I have 3 unopened data breach notices right now. The number of notices that are coming in has been rising exponentially. I don't know if that's just because the bad guys are more active, or if it's just that people are finally, complying more and getting those information out to us. there are 2 notifications that come to us. The first is that preliminary notice, which is often, we're not sure whether we had an incident or not. We're not sure we're going to have to report, but we're just letting you know. Vermont is one of the only states that has that, and the reason we implemented it was to avoid the situation where we hear 6 months later, you know, we had something happen. It's so we can have these conversations, so we can help clarify the law, so we can know that this is a good guy company that is trying to do the right thing from the get-go. When we have that, and then the second notice comes out in the most expedient time possible, but no later than 45 days. And that is the notice that goes to consumer. And the reason why I say the most expedient time possible and why that's so important, Equifax got their notice out in 40 days. And there are people who have sued them and said it did not go out fast enough, even though Vermont has one of the strictest statutes and ours says 45 days. But was that the most expedient time possible? Who knows? So that's, you know, that's a question that might come up. But in terms of the regulator, we wear 2 hats. Our primary hat is we protect the public. So we are the ones who our sole job is looking out for those employees and patients and their families and anybody else and making sure that they are protected. We protect the public. But we also recognize the business that got hit is also part of the public. Okay, our goal is not to re-victimize the victim here. We want an equitable solution where everybody is protected. And so we make a determination, and sometimes it's a very quick determination. Is this a partner? Is this a company that's trying to do the right thing? Or do I need to start thinking about enforcement action? And a lot of times, that determination is made in those first initial conversations. We are thinking about, is this a company that's saying, look, we got hit, we're trying to do all the right things, it happened last week, and we are moving on this quickly? Or is this a company that is saying, you know, why do we have to report to you? What about the PR? If a company starts talking about the PR impact of notice to consumers on that call, that's a really bad thing to do, because, you know, the whole point is getting notification out to consumers. We want to know that this is a business that's trying to do the right thing. If the notice comes to us 6 months late, that's always going to be a red flag. That's always going to be problematic. And I think that the legal community and the business community is starting to figure this out. As long as they get the notice out quickly, and it isn't a massive multi-billion person data breach, we're probably going to say, great, we don't have the resources to do a deep dive investigation of every business that's happening. We often, usually, don't get to that, did you have reasonable data security? If it's a Vermont business or a lot of Vermonters were affected, we may ask a few more questions. Sometimes we'll write a letter. A letter is not the same as issuing a subpoena. Sometimes we're just trying to gather more information. And frankly, you know, one of my biggest focuses now is on the businesses that do not report, because, you know, it is easy to hide a data breach. It is easy just to make the decision not to report, but they get out.
Yeah.
We get calls from whistleblowers. We get calls from employees who say, my boss doesn't want to do the right thing, and I think they should do the right thing. We do sometimes hear from, not the FBI, but other law enforcement sometimes will inform us. Sometimes banks will let us know. You know, or it might show up in the news. It might be posted publicly. So if you're on the line and you're not sure whether to report or not, I would argue that you should err in the side of reporting, or you could give us a call. And I get calls from lawyers sometimes saying, let me give you a hypothetical. What would you do in this situation? You know? And we never say, okay, now we're going to subpoena you and ask who the hypothetical is about. We don't do that. You know, we couldn't do that. So, you know, that's a conversation that's worth happening. And sometimes when it really is in that gray area, the business will issue a notice which says, they use the magic words, in an abundance of caution. We don't know whether we had a data breach or not. We don't know whether your data was exfiltrated. But in an abundance of caution, we're the good guy. We just want to let you know. You've now complied with your obligations. You didn't actually admit you had a data breach, and you got the information out there. Obviously, that only works if it is a true gray area. You know, you can't prevaricate, but that's another thing that we see.
I agree, and I think, you know, in all seriousness, when you have the press conference, when the elected officials start having the press conference, is because people didn't do the right thing, didn't make the call, and things always come out. And that's the crisis that Nick is probably trying to avert. And if you play it out from my side of the ledger, it's hey, were these guys good corporate citizens? Were they responsible? Did they trust the system? We want to have a trusting relationship and work with people and understand that this is incredibly complicated. We want to protect consumers. We want businesses to be protected, and that requires honest communication between both sides of the ledger. Okay, it's time to notify the consumers. Mindy, Nick, Matt, how do you do it? How do you do it?
So, well, I am not up to speed on what the legal requirements are for notification, what form those need to take. But I think in an instance like this, obviously, you would want to make sure that the information was able to get to the consumer, and email works for most people, but there may be, you may have to look at multiple modes of how you're going to inform consumers. That could be letters, emails, whatever. And then everybody's going to have questions. And you're not going to be able to answer all those questions, and you're not going to want to answer all those questions. It's usually valuable in a situation like this to be able to direct people to a centralized location where information is available and can also be updated as it becomes available. An informational web page is usually what we suggest for that type of thing. And that gives folks a place where they can go to find out what's going on. I imagine there are also supposed to be some lines of communication directly maybe to the regulator and the company about specific stuff that I will pass on to others for.
So, and I want Ryan to jump into this too, but Matt, Mindy, Ryan, tell me the process. What are the conversations going on?
Okay, so when we know that a breach has occurred, essentially the insurance carrier is going to deploy their full breach response team in terms of the notification. So they're going to pay for the teams like PR and legal to send the letters out, send out the emails, create the web page potentially that people can go to, 2 years of credit monitoring if that's required by the state in which the person resided who lost their information, call center, because you're trying to run a business, so you want to direct all of these thousands of phone calls to a centralized center that can give people this information about how they register for this 2 years of credit monitoring and what the process is moving forward. And essentially all this is done is to try to restore the reputation of the company to say, hey, this happened. We did our best, and we're going to take our best steps forward to mitigate this for you, and here's what you do next. So in 2016, the average cost of a data breach per record was estimated at about $158 a record. And that entails kind of the full cost of what you're looking at of all these various expenses. They're not necessarily paying for the time lost that you put into this, but if you can use third-party resources to man like these call centers, they're going to take care of that for you. So that's pretty much kind of where the insurance comes in.
Yeah, and on the legal side, again, as I mentioned, we could have a patchwork of states that apply given where the residents live, whose data was compromised. So it may be that some states are going to require notice to be done in a certain form versus another. Generally, written notice is across the board. The first line that's allowed. In some places, you can do electronic notice if certain conditions are met. Sometimes you can do telephonic notice if certain conditions are met. And other times, if the number of victims is great enough, you can actually do a more substitute notice, like a website or the like. So it's going to depend on again, where the people live who've been compromised and what the laws in those states say. But we've got to look at it all. And as Mindy said, the cost is extremely high to do all this.
Ryan, what's the state looking for?
So when notice goes out to consumers, it also has to be sent to the state. Sometimes we will receive the notice a few days before it goes out to the consumers, particularly from smaller businesses saying, does this look okay? And we will look at the notice and we will tell you if it complies with our law. Once the notice goes out to consumers, usually they will send us kind of a form notice without names filled in. We post that to our website. That is public information that the consumers have been notified. And we started doing that primarily because people were getting the notice and calling our consumer assistance program and saying, is this a scam? Because it's telling us to click on a link or it's telling us to call a number. So we started posting the notices, and that's kind of become the standard practice. So it will be public. People will find out, once the notice goes out to consumers. And again, we're there to answer questions and things like that.
Can I?
Michael, question from Michael.
Since it's been mathematically proven that all computers and processors can be broken into, why isn't the solution to this problem encrypting all the data and having real-time backup?
Who wants to take that?
I can take some of it.
Go
I
ahead.
mean, it's expensive. What you're proposing is really expensive. So, I mean, the ultimate solution is, and what we've tried to do at MyWebGrocer is stay away from any PII that we can possibly stay away from. As we've gotten bigger, we've had to take on more, but we have the resources to manage it. But for small companies and stuff, the biggest, leave the bait alone. Get the bait out of there, right? These guys are looking for certain things. If you can avoid having that in your systems, there's nothing of value. But I think you're exactly right. As the cost of those things come down, it's going to be easier and easier to do. But those are expensive propositions. It is now, but real-time backup isn't.
Let me just get Heather and John on that. Best practice?
Yeah, so great question. Encryption is also, it doesn't work with a lot of applications. Unfortunately, you'll have vendors that'll tell you that encryption will slow things down and it won't work as well as they intend it to. So unfortunately, you're relying on vendors to make products that work well with a lot of the security controls, and some of them are bolting them on afterwards. And so, if you want to, you have to kind of make that judgment call. One of the things that we like to do is you classify your data, right? You say, what's your most important data? And you put those expensive controls around that data primarily, and then like Jerry said, if you have data that is not identified or is not as important or is not as critical, then you're weighing, that option of whether or not do we need those same controls against that information, because maybe it's not, a hacker's not going to look for it. And we don't need real-time backups for that particular type of data. So you really have to make those types of judgment calls.
John?
Just to add something different, those already said, both really good comments. I'm a firm believer in being as proactive as you possibly can. So one thing that we work with in several of our clients is actually monitoring the endpoints, the machines, for evil, right? Because if you're going to do evil on a system, you have to do very specific things. So if I see a remote connection to your network at 3 o'clock in the morning with an administrator account, that's evil. That's not a normal person. Or I can pick up the phone and say, hey, was this you? So the mean time from compromise to detection on average is about 6 months. So if you can shrink that down by being proactive on your machines, that's a smarter way to do it. I agree encryption is a good technique. Backup is great. You can mitigate this completely, but it's expensive, and a lot of small businesses can't afford it.
Okay, let me go to Ryan, then Mindy.
Sure. I'll just add that, in certain circumstances, if you've encrypted your whole system, but someone steals the credentials, that's, they still will be able to get it. Some bad guys just use social engineering. They trick the people to give them the data. Sometimes the breach is an ex-employee who doesn't want to return hard drives or laptops that have sensitive data on it as well. And I think Jerry made a really good point that I want to reemphasize, which is data minimization. The trend has been towards businesses just collecting all the data they possibly can in case they can figure out how to monetize it down the road. I want to highly discourage that. Collect the information that you need, have a retention policy, which really means a deletion policy. Delete the data when you don't need it anymore. If there is data that you need going 30 years back, if you're a law firm that has records that needs to keep that data, but you're not going to need it on a daily basis, I would say put it on an external hard drive, put it in a safe, and put an air wall there so that no one can access the data, and then it's a lot safer that way.
And then just one more thing to add to, it's important to know data breaches aren't always on computers. They're paper too. So I read an article just recently in VT Digger. A company was sending out notifications to its patients about a certain HIV medication that was being changed. Unfortunately, they used the wrong kind of envelope. There was a big window in that information with that person's name and address in the first sentence talking about that sensitive information, went out to numbers of patients. That constituted a breach, and that had nothing to do with their computers. It was human error, and it was paper. So that counts too.
I know I get a question over here. Quick question to Matt Borick. Matt, what's the advice to small businesses that don't have the capacity to do this?
Well, that's a great question, because obviously resources are limited, for small businesses in many cases like this. And the most important thing that you can do that doesn't have a very big cost is to make data security a priority. Instill it in the culture of your business, large or small. because the more a company takes this seriously, the better off they're going to be down the road. And as a matter of preparation, as I'll go back to it again, I say, know who it is who's going to be your team. Just in case this is going to happen, know who you're going to call. It's a pretty simple thing, but it's not a decision you ever want to make as the breach is in place, because you're dead meat then. You've got to know who's going to help you for this, above all else. Now, I'll give an example though. In Massachusetts, so for example, if you have data, even if you're in Vermont, a company in Vermont, and you have data belonging to Massachusetts residents, you actually have an obligation to have a data security plan in place. Now that regulation down there though does say that that's a tailored plan to sort of the size of your business. So it's not saying you've got to have the Taj Mahal for everybody, but I think that the thrust behind that though is to get everybody on the same page, at least to think about it. So know what you're going to do on step one, because if you don't know that, then you're never going to be able to beat this.
Okay, we're running short on time, so I want to go to the FBI, then to Nick.
Just a quick comment. Cybersecurity is a national issue. It's basically an epidemic, and we're a population that's not immunized. This is the responsibility of every individual, from their personal computers to their work computers. And at a minimum, everybody, personally and professionally within your companies, you should be having secure passwords. And these are just the two basic things that are absolutely free. Secure passwords that are 20 digits long, change them frequently. That sounds overwhelming. There are ways to do that. And you should be making sure that every single system that you have is updated as the updates come out. If you do those two basic things, you're going to prevent an awful lot of problems. And that'll be a big step towards getting us in a better shape.
Sherman.
So I just have a real quick point on notification. You really want the notification to come from you. You don't want them to read about it in the paper. That's about the worst way that your customers can find out about something like this. So it goes back to being proactive and having a plan and moving forward definitively and implementing that plan.
You want to be the good guy company. Okay, right down the line, 30-second answer. Question, crisis averted, yes or no, and what do you do next? Jerry.
I don't know if it's been averted. It depends on the outcome of your clients and customer base and so on and so forth. But I think that the information provided here was certainly valuable and right on in how to handle something like this.
But you're the leader of your company. What are you telling your troops? What's the next move?
Oh, the next move is clear. Is if we know that we've identified the problem, we've identified the solution. Now we have to understand the impact to the clients. And then we got to get out to them and tell them all that, because that's what they're going to care about. At the end of the day, they're going to feel bad for you for a minute, and then they're going to think about how does this impact.
That's right. That's right. Heather.
We at this point, we're going to keep digging. We need to close some holes. So if we determine that the issue came from that computer from 3 years ago, we're looking to see if the CEO's changed his password. We want to make sure that happens. If there's been any other access, we're really searching our environment to find out what else we can do to proactively close any additional holes that are existing or any vulnerabilities and shore up our fences.
John.
I would make sure we're educating the employees about what happened, so this can't happen again quickly, because it's possible. I would also be doing threat hunting. I would make sure that the threat is currently not still in your network, with a very targeted approach that's going to hopefully uncover what's going on.
Matt.
My advice, of course, is counterintuitive, because lawyers want business as much as anybody else. But my job, my best job I can give you is be ready on the front end, so you never need to call me and never need to go down these roads. And again, it goes back to what we've had all on the line here, is be prepared, be vigilant, and make sure your culture is in line with this, because that's today's reality.
Ryan.
Sounds like the business did everything right, so I'm just going to move on to other matters.
Wow. Jennifer.
This is just the very beginning for me. Hopefully 6 months to 48 months, I'll have someone in handcuffs on this, but I'll be working on it steadily from this point forward, and probably I'll be working with John for a while too on that.
Mindy.
So yeah, insurance is going to want to make sure that forensics has gone back and patched up any holes so that this doesn't happen again. They don't want to pay for this twice. But they are going to be with you every step of the way if there are any potential lawsuits that come after the fact, and any potential fines or penalties. A lot of good policies will actually pay for those issues too. So we're just going to continue to partner and reevaluate as each year goes on.
Nick.
Yep. And so as this is all rolled out, it's gone pretty well for the company, and I think, the reaction is going to be generally positive. We'll be there with you as you have to do some back and forth and maybe some media discussion over the coming weeks, but if it's handled properly and the reaction is decent, it usually fades away after a couple weeks, and then there may be some stories that pop up as more information becomes available, and we'll be there with you as that happens, but our role is it's called crisis communications. It's kind of hot when you're in the moment, and then it phases out.
Okay, I concur with Ryan Krieger. The company did everything right. The consumers are protected. We're moving on to the next one. We got 2 minutes left. Let's open it up for questions or comments. Sir, sorry, I'll get you next.
2018 being what it is, say your customer base is hosted on cloud ERP system. You're their customer. They notify you of a breach, but now your customers in Vermont have also been breached. What's your responsibility there? How do you manage that?
Who wants that?
I'll say it. The position of our state is if there's a breach, notice has to go out to customers. We don't care if the cloud provider provides it or you provide it, but notice has to go out. And if notice doesn't go out, we're probably going to hold both parties responsible. So we assume that you're going to contract that and figure it out amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
You go out to us. We don't go out to our customers.
Yes, yeah, and that's a common objection I get when discussing is people have that false sense of security. My info's in the cloud, I don't need to worry about it. But I think if you really dug into contracts, you would see in most cases, they're pushing that responsibility to you. And the way the client looks at it, your customers, they're like, I'm doing business with you. You need to make it good. And so it is typically your responsibility.
Let me just get one last question here in the front row because we're running out of time.
Yeah, it's a follow-up question to Jeff.
Okay.
You recommend having changing passwords and also having a minimum of 20 characters. Do you also recommend two-factor authentication?
Oh, if it's available, absolutely. Anything that extra you can put, yeah, I have two-factor authentication turned on every single thing I can turn it on. A lot of places don't implement it, but yeah, if it's there, turn it on.
Recommend that. I think most organizations these days have that for any application outside the firewall, but you also recommend that inside the organization, like on the desktop?
It's difficult to give specific recommendations on an organization, internally, and it really depends what data is behind it. But if you have security that you can turn it on. That's my thought. It's uncomfortable for people. It makes it a little more complicated, but really, a couple extra seconds of logging in, is that really worth the problems that we've been just describing here?
Okay, Ryan Krieger, last word.
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing to that point. We are seeing this circumstance happening more and more where people rely on a vendor or a cloud provider and they lose the data and push it back on their customer and says, not our problem. When that happens, we actually appreciate being told that that's happening because we're starting to focus more on the vendors and the cloud providers who aren't protecting people's data and then not taking responsibility for it. And that is something that is very interesting to us.
Okay. Thank you to 7 Days for hosting us, and please join me in thanking my fellow panelists. This was great. Thank you so much.